What happens when an iconic Canadian brand walks out the door, and a community is left jobless? Today, we are diving deep into one of the biggest business shocks in recent memory. Crown Royal, one of Canada's most beloved whiskey brands, is closing its bottling plant in Amherstburg, Ontario, and moving those operations to the United States. It's more than just a business decision, it's a turning point that's raising questions about Canada's economic future, our competitiveness, and our national pride. So stick around, because what's happening here affects every Canadian household that believes in buying local, working hard, and building something to last. Now, let's get right into it. Picture a quiet town along the Detroit-Windsor border. Amherstburg, Ontario, a place where generations of families worked in the same plant, producing the world-famous Crown Royal whiskey. This wasn't just another job site. For almost a century, it was the heartbeat of the community, the source of steady paychecks, and a symbol of Canadian craftsmanship. The sound of production, the smell of whiskey in the air, and the pride of knowing that your work reached homes and celebrations across the globe, that was life in Amherstburg. Until one announcement changed everything.
Now, the plant in nearby Amherstburg that bottles Crown Royal, an iconic Canadian whiskey with a storied history, is closing and shifting work to south of the border.
Shock and sadness in Amherstburg. The Crown Royal bottling facility is closing.
So this is what I think about Crown Royal. That's what they could do. And I think everyone else should do the same thing.
He's annoyed over parent company Diageo's decision to move a bottling plant to the United States.
Those were the first reports, delivered like breaking news. But behind those words were stunned workers, families holding their breath, and a community suddenly facing an uncertain future. An iconic Canadian brand just walked out the door, and the country still can't believe it. Crown Royal, the whiskey that once stood as a symbol of Canadian pride, is now shifting its production across the border to the United States, leaving an entire community jobless, and a nation stunned. And instead of fixing the economic environment that drove the company away, Doug Ford is smashing bottles on camera while the government throws public tantrums. As if outrage could replace solutions. That's not just a corporate story. That's an emotional one. Imagine clocking in every day for 20 or 30 years, proud that your hands helped build something known around the world, and then hearing that it's over, not because the company failed, not because demand disappeared, but because somewhere else is cheaper.
Big changes in the Canadian business world. First, businesses sending small packages to the U.S. will have to pay duties starting today, and a major booze bottling plant is shutting down in Amherstburg.
The shock hit like a wave. Amherstburg, a town whose identity was built around that bottling facility, suddenly found itself without its largest employer.
Amherstburg's largest employer is shutting down. Diageo has announced it will close its Crown Royal bottling plant in the town, a facility that has anchored that community for nearly a century, putting about 160 people out of work.
That's not a small number in a small town. That's hundreds of families losing the foundation of their lives. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. What makes this hit even harder is that nothing was failing. The whiskey is selling. The brand is thriving. The demand hasn't disappeared. The opportunity has. The only thing that changed was the reality that Canada is no longer a competitive place to keep a business alive. Let that sink in. This wasn't a story of bankruptcy or mismanagement. It was a story of cost, of red tape, of slow approvals and rising bills. So now 160 workers are being pushed out. Not because they did anything wrong, but because the system around them made staying there impossible. A town that once took pride in saying we bottle Crown Royal here, now has to watch that legacy leave on the back of a corporate truck. And then came the speculation.
Crown Royal bottling facility you mentioned near the Detroit-Windsor border in Amherstburg, Ontario, is that community's largest employer. And some are pointing towards the Trump trade war as a motive for the move.
Could it be tariffs? Trade politics? Maybe, but the company's explanation was clear: efficiency and competitiveness. Crown Royal didn't leave because demand slowed or the brand faded. It left because Canada has become one of the hardest places in North America to run a business. Energy costs are climbing, taxes keep rising, and companies are forced to navigate layers of paperwork just to stay open. Running a factory here isn't just expensive, it's exhausting. Eventually, the math stopped making sense, and Crown Royal did what every business does when survival is on the line. It chose the environment where it could breathe. Diageo, the parent company of Crown Royal, summed it up in one line.
Decision reflects Diageo's efforts to continuously improve its North American supply chain and ensure the company is best positioned for long-term sustainable growth.
That's corporate language for cutting costs, streamlining logistics, and chasing savings. So what happens next? Across the border, the US has been intentionally shaping itself into a magnet for industry. Lower taxes, quicker approvals, fewer regulatory hurdles. The US has been saying, "Come build here." And companies have listened. Across the border, the United States has spent the last decade turning itself into a magnet for industry. Lower taxes, faster approvals, fewer regulatory traps, and a clear path to growth. The result? The bottling, packaging, and distribution that once took place in Amherstburg will now be handled in Illinois, where the costs are lower, and the system is easier to operate in. Meanwhile, bottling for Canadian shelves and export markets will be handled in Quebec, just enough to legally keep the Made in Canada label alive. But what does that mean for workers? For families? For the identity of a brand that once stood for Canadian craftsmanship? On paper, the brand stays Canadian. In reality, the paychecks do not. This is how corporations leave without ever admitting they left. And while the whiskey will still taste the same, the truth is bitter. The whiskey will still taste the same, the bottle will still look the same, the Crown Royal story will still talk about heritage and tradition, but the hands that once made it no longer have a place in that story. In the midst of that heartbreak, politics entered the picture.
In Ontario, for a boycott of Crown Royal from liquor stores like the one behind me, there are concerns that employees and farmers in other provinces could be the ones on the receiving end.
Doug Ford took center stage, pouring out bottles of Crown Royal on camera and calling for a boycott.
That Ford's move could spill over and hurt Canadian workers. Crown Royal's parent company, Diageo, has large distilleries and bottling facilities in Valleyfield, Quebec, and Gimli, Manitoba.
Ford said, "How can you do this to your largest customer in Ontario?" But theatrics aside, no protest can reopen a closed plant. And it wasn't about public loyalty. It was about numbers. And yet, the decision to walk away came down to approximately $8 million in wage savings. A community that gave the brand its identity was reduced to a line in a cost report. Think about that. A company with billions in annual revenue walked away from nearly a century of loyalty for a savings that would barely register on its quarterly balance sheet. That's not business as usual, that's a wake-up call. Generations of work, loyalty, and local legacy were outweighed by a budget adjustment small enough to get lost inside a corporate quarterly review. Meanwhile, as Canada added more regulation, the US doubled down on making life easier for industry. While Canada was tightening regulations, raising energy costs, and layering new compliance rules on top of old ones, the United States was doing the exact opposite. The result is painfully clear: the US didn't steal Crown Royal. It simply made staying there the smarter move. This is what happens when one country treats business growth like a threat, and the other treats it like a national strategy. The border didn't move. The incentives did, and Crown Royal followed the incentives. For the people of Amherstburg, that logic doesn't soften the loss. This town relies on this company. In Amherstburg, the news didn't feel like a corporate update. It felt like a loss of heartbeat. Think about the silence that replaces the sound of production. No more trucks rumbling down the road, no more shift changes, no more local pride that says, "We make that." What remains is a quiet town forced to redefine itself. The town now faces a silence it has never known. The plant was more than economic infrastructure. It was identity. And as workers walked out of that meeting where the closure was announced, many were numb. Workers walked out of the meeting in shock. Some were angry, others were quiet. Many were just numb. Not because they didn't understand business, but because they had trusted that their loyalty meant something. Then came more speculation. Was this linked to tariffs or the Trump trade war? Maybe partly. Is that community's largest employer, and some are pointing towards the Trump trade war as a motive for the move. But the truth is deeper. This wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of self-preservation, from a company perspective. The mayor said, "We need to maintain the jobs. Without the jobs, we become a bedroom community, and I as mayor do not want that." But saving jobs in today's Canada means confronting the hard truth about why they are leaving. It's not that other countries are stealing them, it's that we've made it harder to keep them. Meanwhile, 80% of the rye, corn, and barley used in Crown Royal still comes from Canadian farms. Which means a boycott could backfire, hurting the very farmers and workers it's meant to protect. Roughly 80% of rye, corn, and barley used in Crown Royal is sourced from Manitoba and from farms in other Canadian provinces. Could a boycott actually backfire and hurt Canadians? And while Ford was smashing bottles for the cameras, Mark Carney, one of the most influential figures in Canadian economic policy, said nothing at all. At the same time, Mark Carney said nothing at all. No explanation, no strategy, no acknowledgement of the item. Silence can say more than speeches. It shows the absence of a plan. The reaction from leadership wasn't focused on fixing the conditions that drove Crown Royal out. It focused on punishing the company for leaving. That's the core issue. Instead of asking why businesses no longer feel safe investing in Canada, the government chose to perform outrage and call it action. It's easy to call for boycotts. It's harder to ask, why did we let it come to this? Because once one major brand proves the exit route works, others will follow. And some already have. Crown Royal is not leaving alone. It's part of a broader shift happening across Canada's industrial sector. Companies involved in manufacturing, food production, packaging, and processing have already begun moving operations to the United States. The math is simple. The US offers clear rules and predictable expenses while Canada continues to burden companies with delays, high overhead, and layers of compliance. Executives don't argue about loyalty or heritage. They look at the numbers and relocate. That's the quiet trend that should worry us most. The concern now isn't the plant that closed, but the companies quietly assessing whether they are next. Crown Royal didn't create this trend. It exposed it. This story isn't just about whiskey. It's about what we value. Ontario recently tried to play tough in the trade arena by restricting certain US alcohol imports, signaling strength and control. Now the situation has reversed with Crown Royal moving its bottling operations to the United States. In the end, it wasn't politics, it wasn't nationalism, it was economics. Diageo is not just Amherstburg's largest employer. It represents far more to this shoreline town of about 25,000. You have generations of families that have worked there. Across the country, people feel the same exhaustion. Across the country, the reaction isn't just anger. It's exhaustion. People are watching factories close, grocery prices climb, housing become unreachable, and now a national brand relocate its operations across the border. That's why this story hits so hard. Because it feels like another sign that Canada is losing the stability it once had. The frustration isn't only about Crown Royal leaving. It's about what that decision represents. It signals that the country is losing the industries that shaped its communities, and the leadership in charge seems unable or unwilling to stop it. And here's the haunting thought that's spreading: if even Crown Royal is gone, what's next? This isn't just a story about a bottle. It's about a country trying to understand why the things that used to feel permanent now feel fragile. So what do you think? Should Canadians boycott Crown Royal? Should the government change how it supports local manufacturing? Or is this simply how global business works now, always chasing the cheaper option? Because the truth is, this story doesn't end in Amherstburg. It could happen anywhere. And if the conditions don't change, if costs keep rising and red tape keeps piling up, Crown Royal won't be the last to leave. If this opened your eyes, don't let it die here. Hit like and smash subscribe. That's how the original video ended, but the real conversation is just beginning. So before you go, ask yourself, how many more times can we afford to say goodbye to something that used to be proudly Canadian? How many more towns have to fall silent before leadership finally listens? Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and let's start a conversation in the comments.